Welcome to another episode of The Riffle, a podcast series brought to you by 10 Leaves. Today, we're opening up the hood of the global financial system to look at something essential, but often overlooked. We're talking about how trust is maintained, or in many cases, how it's fundamentally compromised. We're really diving deep into the plumbing of the financial world.
We are indeed. And our focus today is on conflicts of interest, or COI, specifically within the Dubai International Financial Center, the DIFC.
Yeah.
And we have a really powerful set of sources, a recent cross-sectoral thematic review done by the Dubai Financial Services Authority, the DFSA.
The regulator for that whole hub.
Exactly.
Conflicts of interest can sound like a dry legal term, but really it's about human nature colliding with a duty of care. For our listener, how do we define it in this context?
It's that moment when a firm or, someone who works there has competing interests.
Mm-hmm.
And critically, these interests, say, maximizing a commission or some personal benefit, could compromise their main job. And that job is simple. Act in the client's best interest. Make sure they get fair treatment.
In other words, if I'm a financial advisor and I recommend a product to you because it gets me a bigger bonus, even though there's a cheaper, better option available, that's a conflict.
That's the textbook example.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing is what erodes the entire foundation of the market.
Absolutely.
Effective management of these potential conflicts is just. It's non-negotiable. It's the bedrock of market integrity. If clients can't trust you're looking out for them, the whole system just fails.
So our mission today is to dig into what the DFSA found and the top-line summary.
It's frankly pretty stark. Standards varied significantly with these widespread fundamental problems in how firms handle conflicts.
A clear, pressing need for improvement. That was the big takeaway. Across policies, procedures, the entire control environment. Okay, let's set the scene. Before we get into the more scandalous findings, how did the DFSA actually do this review? This wasn't just a desk exercise, was it?
No, not at all. This was comprehensive. It was part of their broader supervisory work, and it happened in 2025 in two phases.
Two phases.
Phase one started really wide. They sent a survey to 710 authorized firms. So almost every firm in the hub, excluding only the rep offices.
That's a huge scope. And the response rate was what, 97%?
A 97% response rate. It was phenomenal.
Which tells you the industry knew this was important. They were paying attention, even if the results showed they weren't quite up to scratch.
Exactly. But the real depth came in phase two. After the survey, the DFSA did these intensive desk-based reviews and on-site visits to a sample of 25 firms.
And they picked those firms carefully.
Very carefully. They chose them to represent different business models, brokerage, wealth management, banking. They wanted to see if the written policies actually matched what was happening day to day.
And they looked everywhere, the whole life cycle.
Yeah.
Governance, identification, management, monitoring.
Record-keeping, inducements, and of course training. They wanted a truly holistic view.
And that leads us right to the first and maybe the most fundamental problem they found, the risk assessment itself. Or the lack of one.
Yes.
Let's jump straight in. This next finding seems less like an oversight and more like institutional denial. Nearly a third of firms, 34.9%, admitted they did not conduct any formal assessment to see if their business model was even exposed to COI risks.
Just think about that for a second.
It's great.
You're running a complex financial firm with client money, and you haven't even mapped out where your interests might clash with theirs. Without that basic step, managing conflicts becomes, purely accidental. You can't mitigate risks you won't even acknowledge.
Now, what's truly remarkable is the irony in the other figures. Only about 38% of firms confirmed they were exposed. And the firms claiming low or no exposure, they were in the highest risk sectors.
Exactly. Advisory, wealth management, brokerage, that's the huge blind spot the DFSA found. These are areas where conflicts are almost intrinsic to the business model commissions, for example. Yet so many firms were essentially saying, conflict, not here.
It suggests either self-delusion or something worse.
And beyond that missing risk assessment, they found these policy and governance gaps. Over 90% had a written policy, which sounds good. But they were generic. High-level, untailored, often just boilerplate documents that didn't reflect the specific nuanced risks of that firm's actual business.
And this feeds right into a failure of oversight at the top, right? The board's involvement.
Alarmingly limited. The report found many cases where firms had gone years without a single conflict being reported, and this consistent lack of reporting, it was never challenged, never questioned by senior management.
It was just accepted as proof that everything was fine.
A classic tick-the-box exercise, good practice on the other hand, involved having COI as a standing regular agenda item for the board. That forces oversight. It forces them to challenge those blank registers.
Okay, so if the failure to even assess the risk was alarming, this next statistic is the absolute jaw-dropper, the centerpiece of the regulator's concerns.
Yes, the identification blind spot.
3/4 of all respondents, a stunning 75%, reported not identifying a single conflict of interest during the entire preceding 2-year period.
75%. Reporting zero conflicts over 2 years in a major global financial hub.
It just doesn't sound possible.
It should set off alarm bells for any regulator. It strongly suggests that either the scope of what firms consider a conflict is far, far too narrow, or their systems are basically designed to see nothing.
So what were they focusing on if they weren't seeing anything?
Almost exclusively on actual conflicts. So conflicts that had already happened and maybe caused harm. They were completely neglecting the regulatory requirement to identify and manage potential conflicts.
And perceived conflicts, too.
And perceived ones. The expectation is about prevention. If you only focus on actual conflicts, you're just waiting for the damage to be done before you act.
So firefighting, not fire prevention. And how are they even identifying the few they did find?
It was an overwhelming over-reliance on periodic employee disclosures.
So waiting for employees to put their hands up and flag their own conflicts?
Right. Things like reporting outside business interests. And that's necessary, of course, but it can't be the only control you have. They were missing huge categories. Transactional conflicts, conflicts between the firm and a client, or even between two different clients.
Which you see all the time in asset management.
All the time. The regulatory expectation is for proactive, systematic review of your business, your products, your third-party relationships, not just waiting for self-declaration once a year.
Okay, so let's move from identification to administration. Because even when the few conflicts were found, the control framework just fell apart. Record keeping was flagged as being really poor.
The conflicts of interest registers were often just blank, or if they had entries, they were sporadic, inconsistent. But the biggest failure was the lack of detail.
What was missing?
The why. What was the risk assessment? What was the board's decision? What mitigation measures were put in place, and why were those chosen over others? The records were just too thin to support good decisions.
And if the records are incomplete, you can't manage the risk. And if you can't manage it, you certainly can't monitor it.
And this is where the system collapses. Almost half of the firms were cited for needing improvement in monitoring. And here's another worrying fact. Over a fifth of respondents confirmed their COI arrangements were never subject to an internal audit review.
So that third line of defense was just gone. No independent check to see if the controls were actually working.
Bypassed entirely.
That's extremely concerning. What about disclosure? Let's say a firm does manage to identify a potential conflict. How are they handling telling the client?
Well, disclosure is one of the most powerful tools, and while 90% of firms said they would disclose conflicts, a huge chunk, 36%, said they would only disclose actual conflicts, not potential ones.
So they wait until the risk has already happened before telling the client there might be a problem.
Yes, which completely defeats the purpose of transparency. You have to disclose potential risks so the client can make an informed choice.
Now, to be fair, the DFSA did see some good practices here.
Yes, they noted some effective controls. Things like physical and technological segregation, what we call Chinese walls, to stop sensitive information from flowing between departments. And a small number of firms were providing periodic disclosure to clients on both potential and existing COI.
That's the gold standard.
That is the gold standard. Full, upfront transparency.
Let's turn to the people side of this now. Training. Because your controls are only as good as the people who use them. And ineffective training means your system is guaranteed to fail.
Training was identified as a major area needing a serious overhaul. The policies were generic, so the training was generic. It was high-level, theoretical, not tailored to the specific business.
A trader needs different training than a wealth manager.
Exactly. The training lacked relevant context. It was just another tick-box compliance exercise, and in many cases, firms couldn't even prove training had happened. No materials, no attendance records.
Unbelievable.
And sometimes training was only for new joiners, meaning long-term employees who often had the most complex relationships, weren't getting regular updates.
Okay, finally, let's touch on inducements, gifts, entertainment, that sort of thing. A potent source of COI.
Right. Here, there was some positive news. Almost 2/3 of firms reported they neither receive nor provide inducements, which suggests pretty tight internal controls.
But for the ones that did.
The issue was clarity. The policies often lacked clear guidance on what was a permissible benefit. This created gray areas for employees, and the policies were often, light touch on the consequences for not reporting something.
So if the rule is vague and the penalty is light, why would anyone prioritize reporting it?
Precisely. The whole framework just lacked teeth.
Okay, let's synthesize all this. Looking across the firms that got that deeper, Phase 2 inspection, the DFSA concluded that 4 areas were overwhelmingly deficient.
The 4 pillars that need immediate reinforcement are governance, identification, record-keeping, and training. If those 4 are weak, the entire structure of client protection is undermined.
So the DFSA isn't just pointing out problems. They're providing a blueprint for better practice based on what the best firms were already doing. What does that roadmap look like?
It's a focus on customization and enforcement. 1. Tailor your policies to your specific business. 2. Use technology to systematically record, assess, and monitor conflicts. Move away from paper registers. 3. Ensure regular, proactive governance oversight. The board has to actively challenge what it's seeing or not seeing. And 4. Implement mandatory scenario-based training that's adapted to the specific roles of your employees.
For you, our listener, understanding these control weaknesses is absolutely vital. The system relies on proper management of competing interests. When these controls fail, market integrity suffers, and ultimately, you're the one who pays the price.
Absolutely. And this brings us back to the most critical, most provocative finding from the entire report.
That 75% number.
That 3/4 of firms reported 0 conflicts of interest over 2 years. The regulator basically says this is statistically implausible. It forces all of us to consider the difference between 2 possibilities.
Which are?
If the systems and the registers are consistently blank, does that lack of recorded conflict mean the firm is genuinely safe and conflict-free? Or does it simply mean the firm hasn't looked hard enough?
Or has designed a system that actively avoids finding anything.
Exactly. It's the critical difference between not having a conflict and not having looked for one. And it suggests a potential failure of imagination at the governance level, where silence is mistaken for safety.
A truly powerful thought to mull over as we think about how trust is really maintained or failed in the world's major financial centers. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Always a pleasure.